very warm welcome to all of our friends out there in the Bosshole Transformation Nation. This is your host, John Brewer. So good to have you here on this episode of the Bosshole Chronicles. And joining me today is Carey Williams. Carey and I were invited to co-present by Roy Getz to his EOS group. Now, Roy is an EOS implementer here in Columbus, and you may recognize his name because he's been a guest on the podcast. But our topic for the day was focusing on the 5 different generations in the workforce and talking about how to create psychological safety within organizations. And so that's what Carey and I talked about. Well, I was so intrigued by her work that I wanted to have her on the podcast to talk about and share with the Bosshole Transformation Nation how do organizations need to be navigating this influx of an emerging workforce, Gen Z, but also understand and appreciate the different generations that are in the workplace right now. Carey is the HR leader at Doyle HCM, located right here in Columbus, Ohio. Let's jump in. The Bosshole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Well, Carey Williams, welcome to the Bosshole Chronicles. It's good to have you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for today's conversation.
And I'm excited because this is also helping to start our new year, kicking off 2025. It's going to be one of our earlier episodes in the new year. But our audience already knows, Carey, you and I met back in 2024 through a mutual friend, Roy Getz, who has also been a guest on the podcast. And I'll put that in the show notes because his episode was amazing. The work we got to do, we co-presented at this event, and I was just really intrigued by the depth and the breadth of the work you've done around the many different generations that are in the workforce. I thought it'd be really helpful for our audience to first learn a little bit more about Doyle HCM. I mean, that is the company for which you work, and information in the show notes about that. But then how did you move into this depth of knowledge about the multiple generations in the workforce? And then we're going to get into really the crux of this is how do we help managers prepare for and work with the most recent emerging workforce? So yeah, just give us a little bit of the background of Doyle HCM, what you do, and how you came into this work.
Well, some background. So I started off in recruiting, talent acquisition, HR consulting, primarily in warehousing and logistics. And so I was primarily very client-facing in my work, and really just had a passion for understanding people in the workplace. I thought it was just really fascinating to me to understanding why we are the way we are, especially in our place of work. And so I unfortunately got laid off about 2 years ago and landed with Doyle HCM, thankfully. And our company, Doyle HCM, we not only have me internal HR, but we also offer HR and payroll tax, and we have an accounting division. So kind of a full suite of services to our clients. Been here for about 2 years now, and kind of noticed some quirks about our team. We had such a variety of generations in our workplace, and some of the challenges that the managers were coming to me with just made me scratch my head a little bit.
All right, fair enough.
And it kind of took me back and said, how do we take a step back and look at this and say, are we doing the right thing for our people?
Okay.
And what I meant by that is saying, are we doing our one-on-ones? Do we really know our team and our team members well enough to know what outside factors or drivers might be impacting their work with us? So that kind of led me into this multi-generation concept of what do we do here at Doyle? How do we do this in a way that's meaningful and get our managers from the older generations to the younger generation to kind of align on the same page instead of kind of being on opposite pages, and then it's just dysfunction all around.
Sure.
So we kind of just started from the basics. Are we doing the right thing? Are we having the right conversations? Do we know our people? And so when I had the opportunity to meet with Roy's team, with you, it just kind of made sense to have this discussion. And it's so prevalent in today's organizations. And I think people don't see multi-generations as maybe the pain point. It's, oh, you're a poor manager or you just don't know. And you peel back the onion layers and like this could be the underlying reason why
Yeah,
there might be challenges, right?
sure. Well, and so that's interesting. So it really came from a more of an internal reflection and a bit of an audit of looking
Yeah.
at your own organization, but realizing, hey, every organization with which we work, your clients, even our clients at Real Good Ventures, they have to deal with the same thing. This is just a truth of the different generations that are in the workforce. But the most important thing is how can we learn from what the unique characteristics of each one, but also not make these overgeneralizations.
Yeah,
Is that a fair statement?
absolutely. Yeah.
Because I always got okay, just because we're talking about the different generations in the workforce, you are in the millennial group, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Remind me, because I'm 63, so am I actually a boomer or am I Gen X? I'm kind of on the cusp, aren't I?
Yeah, yeah. And I
Okay.
think that's also a fascinating thing too. I think when we talk about these generations, I don't think it's always a one size fits all. I think it's
Agreed.
a pendulum, right? Like,
Agreed.
yeah, you have these shapers of world events that happen or things that happen that, motivate us in certain ways, like social issues or,
Yeah,
wars and stuff like that. So I don't think that you're just in this bucket of this is your generation and you behave like this. I look at myself as a little bit of a pendulum, John, and I think you're probably the same way that you have some of those characteristics and stuff that make you who you are.
for sure. And that's why I always got very uncomfortable when people said, well, that's a millennial, that's a Gen X. No, I did. That's a Gen Xer. They're that way. And I think there is a real danger to that.
Mhm.
I mean, a gross oversimplification of putting people in a bucket. I love that idea of the pendulum, that it doesn't have you don't have to be rooted in these characteristics. The acknowledgement that there are five unique generations in the workforce, I think, can be a great basis for helping to appreciate what different people bring to the workforce. But the danger is really making those oversimplifications and those generalizations, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And then knowing what to do with that, not being able to take the action steps or the quote of the year, I don't have time for that. Right. Well,
Oh,
time is
right.
everything. And it's like, well, you got to make time or else it is money in business. Right. So yeah, yeah, I'd say that's
Okay.
fair.
Well, and would you say it's safe to say, Carrie, that while each generation demographically represents, certain age groups, there are certain influences or norms that are associated with them, which can help guide managers and leaders in organizations understand what their desires may be,
Yeah.
not exclusively, not overgeneralizing, but what are some of the things that really sort of drive them, or based on their core values.
Yeah.
For example, you said it, what you said right at the very beginning, you were looking at your own staff at Doyle and thinking, are they getting feedback? Are they getting regular input? And I will tell you, there are people that are probably listening going, regular feedback. What are you talking
Right.
about, Carrie? Right. You know what I mean? So
Oh, yeah.
it's almost that default of saying, we never got that. That doesn't mean that old way is right. And managers have to consider, I'm digging myself a hole here because I keep ending up going back to overgeneralization.
It's
Help me.
hard. It's hard not to stereotype.
It is. So help me understand, Carrie, how to avoid that. But most importantly, let's start to have a conversation around how do we help managers stay out of the boss hole zone when they're dealing with different generations in the workforce.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking at a manager in a workplace, I think everything needs to start from the employee experience viewpoint.
Okay.
And that's creating these people viewpoints from the day that that person's being recruited to hopefully the end of their employee life cycle. So, initially off the bat, when I tell managers they're getting a new team member, it's you're going to spend time to get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know your people. You need to ask them, how do you like to be managed? How do you not like to be managed? How do you receive feedback? Do you like email versus phone? Do
Mm-hmm.
you like Teams versus phone? So asking those basics will set the tone for the future of that manager employee relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And building that trust and that healthy rapport with that employee is going to just open up that door for so much more than what a manager could hope for. I
Hmm.
think a lot of times we miss that personal touch right off the bat, and then you're running backwards trying to fix the issue when you can nip it right then and there. So I always encourage managers and new employees to have that upfront forward conversation. And it could be, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do after work? It doesn't need to be just about KPIs and metrics.
Right.
There are so many other factors outside of just the generation that are impacting the employee's ability to perform well or not
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
And so I think if we go back to the basics there, create that foundation of good rapport, good trust, and continue that on through the duration of that employment. And I mean that by don't just delete their one-on-ones or remove their one-on-ones off their calendar.
Right.
Sorry, busy this week. I don't have the time. That time is going to cause issues down the road.
Sure.
And so I think from that viewpoint, doing that is going to be the simplest way. But I also think asking the questions of, hey, how can I best support you?
Hmm.
I've not gotten asked that question. And I feel like, okay, I can't ask them for help. I can't ask them for support.
Right.
You can, right? And I'm a millennial. I'm supposed to be tech savvy, but well, I'm not that tech savvy, right? And so they might just think, oh, she'll figure it out. Well,
Right.
if we don't ask those things, then you're going to be sometimes a little bit fearful to ask your manager for support. So,
So a great example of why those generalizations are so dangerous,
yeah,
because, and again, I'd like to think of myself as a person who is older in the workforce of
mhm,
being, comparatively speaking, pretty tech savvy, but nothing like those, well, Gen Z that has grown up with technology. There I go. I'm generalizing again. But the one universal truth I think, Carey, that you share with us that I think is so powerful for our managers is you must invest the time individually with your direct reports.
yeah, 100%.
Don't make those assumptions. I mean, when we talk about behavioral data that we use with predictive index, whether it's driven by that, just sitting down and being very intentional about investing that time with each of your direct reports is absolutely essential. Now that brings up, and I'm sure you see this in the world of human capital and human resources, when we saddle managers with 10, 15 direct reports, there's no way they can do that. There's no way. So there could be a structural issue within an organization because you're giving
Right,
managers, you're not giving them that opportunity for that one-on-one time.
right.
Okay. The other thing that I take away from it is it's not just at the beginning of their employment, but creating that cadence that
Yeah,
works best for them and for you.
sure.
How do I best support you? I know exactly what you mean. When you said that, there was a time when you were not asked, what can I do? How can I help you the most? And it's like, okay, I feel like I'm just kind of floating out there without
Yeah.
much direction. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it breeds a little bit of fear and
Sure.
people too, is that you don't know how to ask for the support that you might need. You might, for me, I've experienced this where if I ask for help, it might be viewed as a failure or
Yeah.
why'd we hire her for that? She's
Yep.
supposed to know how to do that. Right. So I think there's these other things that can kind of trickle down and affect the employee in somewhat of a negative way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I am going to shift a little bit and we will talk a little bit more about the most recent emerging workforce, Gen Z,
Hmm.
because not to oversimplify or generalize, this emerging workforce seems to be a bit of a conundrum for some managers
Hmm.
and supervisors because every individual needs to be considered uniquely, just like they do from their behavioral wiring and their workplace activities and their preferences. And how do we find a way to help them be successful? But what is unique about this emerging workforce and what they desire from a place of employment?
Yeah, I love Gen Z because of this.
Okay.
I think it's such a move. It's just a power move, and I love it.
Okay.
The one thing I hear a lot is the flexibility. And that's something we can kind of go into a little bit more detail later is that the flexibility quote unquote flexibility, because I think there's a wide range of what that means to who and to what company, but
Okay.
they want that. They want that flexibility, that freedom to do kind of what they please during the day where they want to, right? They don't want to feel like they're constrained to a cubicle. They want their independence, they want the individuality, they want diversity, inclusion. I think they're so unique in that their social justice issues that have happened, they've become so empowered by that. So you'll see a lot of Gen Zers, they want more involvement with those movements. They're concerned about the future, I should say. They
Okay.
everything they're doing is very calculated in that way. But when we look at Gen Z, they look at what are you doing philanthropy wise with a business? What are you doing for social justice movements? What are you doing to empower not only our workplace, but the world around us?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love Gen Z. It's just a powerful generation that has technology at their fingertips, which can be a double-edged sword, right? Everything is right there, right then, quick, quick, quick. Think about TikTok, they're flipping through the next thing very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the diversity, the creativity, and the individuality of this generation. And I think where the challenge is the other generations not understanding the individuality and the independence and this power move of Gen Z. And, you see it with some of these huge organizations coming back, you're forcing them back into the office. It's funny just seeing kind of everyone going, oh, well, that didn't work. Well, yeah, it's
Well,
probably not going to work fully.
no, it's not. I mean, we've talked a lot about that to great extent on the podcast, that if COVID did anything, it proved that the ability to work remotely, create a virtual workforce is totally doable. And you got people, moving to different parts of the country and still doing the same job. To try to reverse that, I mean, I know in the public sector there are discussions about that, and that is a different story altogether. But in the private sector, I just think when there is an option, look, if you're going to make me come back to the office, I'm going to find another job that allows me to work remotely. That kind of in that power move realm that you talk about with Gen Z. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Because I know that even for your group, your age, even in your, no, but I mean, I do
My
it again.
generation.
Even in your age, I love working remotely.
Yeah.
I cannot conceive of going back into an office.
Yeah.
I mean, would I do it if I had to do it? Sure, I could. But I think that there are newer members of the workforce that are saying, I will never do that. And
Yeah.
then interestingly enough, I know that there are people in Gen Z that say, no, I really want to work in an office. I want to work
100%.
with
Yeah.
people too. We just have
Yeah.
to be really aware of that.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I totally agree with that statement because, me being a millennial, I enjoy coming into the office. I do my best work in my office, hands down.
Hmm.
And so there's people, I mean, do I like having the flexibility to work from home when I can? Absolutely. But I remember when we were doing with the EOS group and one of the gentlemen had mentioned that their teams, one of the owners or presidents was wanting their team to get back into the office.
Right.
And I remember asking, well, what's wrong with the remote work model? Nothing. We just want them back. Well,
Right.
that makes that group of employees now, do you trust me that I'm doing my work? Have I not
Exactly.
been doing my work right? Is there something wrong? So you start questioning so much more
Hmm.
when there's no real reason. If it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing, give it the option. But it becomes costly. You're going to lose really good employees, have to restart that recruiting process. Somebody might be doing that job because, Jane Doe left. So there's just so many layers and so many things that can be affected by something as simple as just, hey, if it works, keep it, right?
Right. And I think you hit on a key word. You like the flexibility. That's where I think the mandates of work is work only if you're here from 8 to 5. Work has many different looks
Yeah.
to it now. And
Yeah.
if we can have a good, strong, trusting adult, act like adults
Hmm.
and have a trusting relationship where you're going to get the work done. I'm going to judge your performance based on outcome versus observation,
Yeah.
which is what it used to be. And we've talked about, sort of, that old model just sort of going away. So, Carey, if you had, let's just say you've got business owners in the room, and I know you do a lot of this. And by the way, everybody, Carey's contact information is in the show notes. But, Carey, if you had them in the room, what are some things you could recommend for them to prepare their managers and supervisors to be better at working with this emerging generation?
Yeah. one, understand what the generations are in your workforce.
Okay.
I mean, step one, what
So
is your demo?
literally do a demographic breakdown of who's in the workforce.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And because that's going to be helpful for you understanding what your landscape looks like and what you need to train, what you need to train. And I think if we can put that in front of leaders and say, hey, 50% of our generation is baby boomers and 25% is Gen Z, 25% is millennials, then you're going to have a better understanding of, okay, where do we go from here?
Okay.
Um, some ideas in terms of how do we manage this is focus groups are really great to have, creating mentorship programs,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be formal or informal. Collaboration, so teams with multi generations within that team, and really embracing the the traditionalists and the baby boomers and their experience, because wow, that's something that you can't be more grateful to have that kind of experience on
Oh
your
yeah,
team.
for sure.
It's unbelievable. The amount of folks that I've learned from and the older generations is just amazing. I'm so grateful to have met them and had good mentors. So I think those are some things that you can do and implement very easily, and has all the generations coming together and discussing whether that's how do we optimize technology, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe a baby boomer is better at negotiating, helping teach a new sales rep who's a Gen Z how to negotiate better.
Mm-hmm.
So forcing these collaborative environments to occur through whether that's, like I said, mentorship programs, or even just having a team outing and
Mm-hmm.
allowing folks to collaborate. Have an office space where you have a lunchroom, talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think those are just the basic foundations without having to spend a whole lot of money or invest a whole lot of time. But you got to understand your workforce landscape first.
That makes so much sense because, well, and also if you have, a sizable percentage of your workforce that are closer to retirement,
Mhm.
that also helps you to strategize how are we going to make sure we're recruiting
Yep.
and onboarding the right kind of people to be able to move through. And that legacy, the legacy knowledge that comes with your more senior, and again, it doesn't have to be necessarily chronological, but people that have been there longer. How do we how do we sort of cross pollinate that with everybody in the organization? One thing you said, Carey, that I think I've heard organizations doing that are remote, that are more virtual, if versus hybrid, that they have said, look, we're very intentional about bringing people together maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and it's a little bit of work and a lot of community.
Mhm.
And I mean, I know people that go, oh, I got to go to this thing with my
Yeah.
business, but and because they love being remote and
Yeah.
independent, but there's so much value. There's a tremendous amount of value when you can just be in community with coworkers that maybe the only experience you've had is on Teams or Zoom or on a conference call, and just get to know them.
Yeah.
That creates a real esprit de corps, I would think.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there's buddy systems. If a new
Oh
hire is
yeah,
coming, buddy them up. I think that's also a really great way to start off with, here's the culture. This is how you can grow with us.
right,
Building the succession planning for the folks that are retiring is crucial because recruiting is getting very expensive,
right,
right?
right.
So looking at those in different ways, I think will be helpful.
Can you do something for us though? You mentioned a mentor. I love the idea of the
Mhm.
mentoring programs, but a buddy system is different. Can you give our listeners just a little bit of distinction of those two? Because I totally agree with you on the both, but the buddy system for a new hire is incredibly helpful. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. We implemented it a while back in logistics when we were in the warehousing space. We third party logistics, and we found that even just finding a bathroom, or how do I request time off, or
Yeah.
where do I put my pay stubs? So the day they started, they'd have a buddy assigned to them. And that was a voluntary system. So
Hmm.
you weren't just like, hey, Jane, you're doing this kind of thing. It was like, who would like to be part of the buddy system?
That'd
And
be
we
a way to
also,
create a buddy hole. Sorry, I
yes,
I
that is
mean
a buddy hole.
that is a buddy hole. If you force them to do it, that's for sure. We may have a new podcast there. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Love it. Um, and so we made it very relaxed. It wasn't like a pressure thing.
Right.
Um, and so that individual who had been there longer and more tenure would just help them with the basics.
Hmm.
And that really was, where's the restroom? How do I do this? Or, hey, I have an issue with my RF scanner. Do you know how
Hmm.
to fix this? rather than them walking around trying to find a supervisor, they had their buddy with them, helping them train, but also was there for the first about 60 to 90 days of their employment.
Yeah.
And then after that, they're pretty much so assimilated into the day to day. Versus the mentorship program, who can make it more formal where you're matching a pair. That's more formal, more informal. We're not actually looking at, certain factors, characteristics, growth, all of that. So that is on more of a frequency cadence. So I'd say mentorship, you do it once a month or bi-weekly, whatever frequency is
Right.
the best for that duo. That one should last until they say we would not like to do it anymore. I think the
Yeah.
longer the mentorship happens, the better. Um, and it's more tactical, I think, with a mentorship. You have exactly like, hey, Carey wants to be a VP of HR one day.
Mm-hmm.
Let's link her up with so and so who's done that trajectory and that path, and talk about how they got there, the hurdles, certifications, what have you, to get.
Right. So it sounds like mentorship is really more around competencies, whereas buddy systems are around connections
Yeah.
socialization. Only once in my career, and our listeners have heard this before. Once in my career, was I assigned a buddy, and I think I was in my late 40s, early 50s, took on this position, and it didn't matter how old you were or young you were, you got a buddy. And this gentleman, he was, I think, about 10 years my junior. Amazing guy. His name is Dan. I stay in touch with him to this day, but he was in a totally different department. I had nothing to do with we had nothing to do with each other's departments, but we would get together for coffee. And you're right. It's like, hey, well, what do I do for this? Or it's an absolute safe space.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing about that, and in our onboarding model that we use at Real Good Ventures, we would call this part of that socialization, because his network or the buddy's network now becomes part of your network
Yeah.
immediately from, like, as you said, day one. That
Yeah.
is so powerful in creating that connection
It is.
within the organization, even if it's virtual. I contend it can still be done virtually. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to understand the norms of your business,
Yes. Yep.
right? It's, hey, don't call Carey at 10 a.m. because she's normally really busy. Call her at 10:30.
Yeah.
It's just like those little things that you don't think about that come about randomly, and you're like, okay, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do
Yeah.
I ask?
Yep. Carey, one as we start to wrap things up, one of the things that now, by the way, this is related to what we just talked about in terms of a buddy system, but when you think about onboarding,
Mm-hmm.
and I know Glassdoor did a study, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, that organizations that had a good, strong, comprehensive onboarding program, and it's more than just 2 or 3 days where here's your computer and here's your log on. I mean, it was weeks long, sometimes months long.
Yeah.
And the increase or the improvement in retention of good, strong candidates, I mean, it was far beyond those organizations that didn't have it. Their churn and their turnover was much higher. What advice could you give or guidance could you give our listeners, our managers, to keep them out of the boss hole zone? What are some of the must-haves when it comes to onboarding, and especially when it comes to our emerging workforce?
Yeah. This is a loaded question and maybe another podcast.
Maybe.
Oh, I think there's a lot of factors with onboarding, and I believe onboarding starts at day zero.
Hmm.
What the expectation is we set forth on the initial phone call with a candidate for any job we're hiring, it starts there.
Hmm.
And so any managers and any leaders looking to start an onboarding program or tweak theirs, I think you got to set the expectation of, what do you want from this?
Hmm.
What is it that we're trying to achieve with a successful onboarding program? Is it just to check the box and show them how to log in to the employee portal to view a pay stub?
Hmm.
Or is it, here's what your expectations are within this first 90 days. And after 90 days, we hope that your metrics and KPIs are like this. But in the interim, here's what we're going to do to get you there.
Right.
So, I think fundamentally we got to think about what is the outcome first. But how I handle things here at Doyle is they sit with me on their first day for about 2 hours. And I go through all the core policies, who we are, our philosophy, our core values, and how that is ingrained in our entrepreneurial operating system and the model we use here at Doyle. And then I give them insight into what their next 60, 90 days will look like.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time they are handed off to their manager, and the manager has a spreadsheet of this is what you are expected to learn, and we're going to teach you over the first week, and so on. So they know what is happening every single day for that first 90-day period.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, I don't
Nope.
know.
Nobody's
It's, I
drifting.
know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know the expectation. The expectation is right in front of you. And if the manager sees that that person, the new hire might be kind of missing the mark a little bit, then you know how to tweak it. You know
Right.
what you need to improve training wise with that new hire for the long haul. And I don't think onboarding really stops. I mean, I think we continue to check in as
Yeah.
HR. We should be check-ins. How are
Right.
you doing? How did your first 90-day go? Anything we can do to best support you.
Mm-hmm. And the manager being an active participant. I mean, in our, they can't abdicate their role. And this is where I see, our managers having a strong and healthy relationship with their HR partners to be able to make sure that, look, we want this person to be successful. Our assumption is that the managers do as well. We're going to lay the groundwork to help that happen. And I appreciate that. I think organizations hear the word onboarding and they kind of see it as check a box. Here's your
Mhm.
stuff. And we kind of lose track of people after maybe a week or 2 weeks
Mhm.
where the data is absolutely clear when it is really well thought out and very intentional. We hold on to these people because it is way, way too expensive to be churning through people. And I know organizations are facing that right now. The turnover is still an issue. I mean, disengagement is still an issue. And it really is surprisingly solvable when you have the right systems and the right tools in place. So,
We have if somebody wants a new position here at Doyle, I have a form they fill out.
okay.
It's a new position request form. Why do you need a new role? What are the 5 must-haves and what are the 5 like-to-haves?
Mm-hmm.
Because a must-have and a like-to-have is completely different.
Yeah.
So once I can get that foundation and I post this job and I'm scrubbing through it, what questions matter to
Mm-hmm.
this particular role? What are the key factors in this person's resume? What are the key things this person's resume that stuck out to you? Because you got to remember, we hired that person for a reason,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if they miss the mark 90 days, okay, well, what happened in that 90 days?
Right.
So going back to our previous conversation or earlier in the conversation about one-on-ones, it's important to schedule those right off the rip.
Mm-hmm.
Just put them on the calendar for the rest of the year. Get them done.
And you honor those. I mean, yeah. I mean, those are, like you said, you don't just sort of cancel that because, something else came up. Those are times that you want to hold precious, I
Yeah.
would think. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not always about work. It's
Right.
how are you doing? How was your holiday? How's your mother's daughter's son? Like those things matter. The
Right.
small talk does matter, whether we like it or not, it does matter. So I think we just have to set the tone early on and make sure that if we are not able to do it one day, we're moving it to the next.
Right. Right. It's so my chuckle there was only because I know there are some people out there listening go, what? I got to talk about personal stuff. And that has nothing to do with generations. We have managers and, sometimes out there that are thinking, just come in and do your work and leave your personal life outside the door. It's like, that's not the workplace anymore.
No, it's not.
Everything comes through the door.
Oh,
So,
100%. And then
yeah.
some.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
then yes, we talk about head, heart, and briefcase and baggage. And if you're a manager, you're going to have to deal with all of it. Well, Carey, this has been great. Any final, I mean, if you could give our listeners, our managers, just one tidbit of saying, here's what you need to do to get ready for Gen Z, any little tidbit.
Embrace them. Embrace it. Embrace the uniqueness. Embrace the mindset that they have. They will teach you a lot. And they will empower you as an older leader in the company to
Yep.
put yourself in uncomfortable places. It'll help you grow in your leadership. So
I like
take that.
that.
Allow the flexibility to flow because that's not going anywhere anytime soon,
Be-
especially with
because
Gen
as you
Z.
told me a few weeks ago when we were talking about this episode, Gen Alpha,
Mhm.
you said, and I have it in my notes, 10 times.
Oh yeah.
10
Oh
times.
yeah.
Go ahead. What was your comment about Gen Alpha?
that they're coming in hot. I mean, if you think about each generation, it's just going to be more tech savvy, and like with the way that technology and AI is. I mean, geez, I bought a game for my niece who's 7, and it's a
Okay.
Pictionary game that you play with AI.
What? Oh my
Yes.
gosh. Age
So
7?
yeah,
Oh
she's
my
7.
gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible.
So
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
7 years old. She's already working with AI. I'm like, might as well teach her young.
Yeah. I know I just had people saying, you know what, by that time I'm going to retire. No, I'm kidding. We want our managers to be, like you said, embrace it, understand that the emerging workforce, they bring something unique to the workplace. Let's figure out what it is.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
be
good.
vulnerable as a leader. Be vulnerable and be
Yeah.
open. And sometimes that does make you tap into some of the things that aren't so nice about yourself, but it'll
That's
make you
true.
better in the long run. And I enjoyed this conversation because I think there's so much more to talk about the generations. But I go Gen Z, be yourself.
What did you say? Make your power move.
Yeah, make your
I think
power move. I
I
love
think
it.
you gave us the title Gen Z's power move. I think that's what I'm gonna
That's
have to
it.
say
I
it.
love
Yeah.
it.
Well, Carey, thank you so much. Listen, promise me, let's stay in touch and have you back and talk as we start to think about the dynamics of bringing people and folding people into the workplace and helping them be successful, helping them thrive. We'd love to have you back. That'd be great.
Yeah, I would love it. Thank you for having me, John.
Oh, you got it. And thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles. Thanks very much for checking out this episode of the Bosshole Chronicles. It was so good to have you here. And if you have your own Bosshole story that you want to share with the Bosshole Transformation Nation, just reach out. You can email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you next time.